Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind. This is a timely episode as next week marks Trans Awareness Week, and I am chatting to someone that I think is absolutely amazing. That is Cynthia Fortlage. Cynthia is an award-winning executive and gender identity educator, speaker, consultant, and specialist. She is someone who describes herself as a global nomad and entrepreneur living in London, and she identifies as a white queer woman with a trans history. Cynthia has an amazing story, and I'm so excited to dive into this with you. I just want to pop a trigger warning on the episode that we do talk about suicide, mental health, and the challenging times that Cynthia has experienced throughout her life, from younger days through to gender expression, realization, exploration, through to today. So just take care of yourself while listening. Take a break if you need to, and come back to it. But Cynthia just, yeah, like I said, has an amazing story. I have the pleasure of knowing Cynthia in many different environments, from working in diversity, equity, inclusion, through to partying at the House of Happiness. And we talk a little bit about her love of dancing, and soundtracks and all that. But there's so much love and joy and inspiration and aspiration in this episode, and you're going to hear it right now. So enjoy and let me know what you think. Cheers. Hey Cynthia, it is wonderful to see you as always. Welcome to Pause and Rewind.
Well, thank you, Neil. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm sure this will be a conversation most people have never heard from me.
Oh, well, I am super excited about it. I just love seeing you in so many different environments, whether that's online, or on the dance floor or a DEI event. It really varies. And I'd love to start with that big question I always ask everyone. What does the world look like for Cynthia Fortlage right now?
Wow. So what does the world look like? There's a lot going on. I don't think it's a lot, but when I tell people, they go, "Oh my God, so much." So, um, I see the world's obviously, especially from the corporate clients I work with, it's very much, it's literally pausing at this point. People are unsure where to go. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually using it as a pivot point to change the conversation slightly. And and I use this analogy just so that listeners will understand. If we talk about, the typical diversity, equity, inclusion to create spaces where people feel they belong, the reality is that in a lot of my work, I do, and I posted just recently, I center cisgender women for a number of reasons, not the least, which was I was the national leader for the feminist movement. So I actually learned to fight for women's rights before I learned to fight for LGBTQ plus rights. But in doing this, if I look at it from a women's perspective, women make up 50% of the population, give or take. They make up 50% of the workforce. So if we're talking about diversity, I would say, yeah, check box, it's done. We don't need to talk about diversity. Now, I'm being tongue in cheek, but if we talk about inclusion, women aren't making it. We're not seeing it. And the numbers show it, across all industries, just simply 27%, of women make it into a senior leadership role. And don't even get me started on equity conversations. So the idea is that, from an inclusion perspective, that's the next space we really need to focus on. And so for me, I'm talking a lot about inclusion, not about diversity. We still need diversity. That's always going to be brought into it, but it's about inclusion, getting people included listening to the voices, getting them to the table. So that's kind of where I'm at. So that's a bit of a different voice that I'm bringing to the conversation. And always, as people are starting to get to know me, shooting for the middle ground, not looking for the perfection of either end of the conversation spectrum, but really trying to find a middle ground because my corporate experience, I mean, I have 30 years. It taught me the answer is always somewhere in the middle. We just need to find it. But that requires us to talk, and that requires safe spaces, which is why I always talk about acceptance without understanding as a fundamental part of how we get to those safe spaces where people can feel they belong in those conversations. So that's where I'm at.
I mean, that's huge, and I have seen the pivot, in the kind of the way that you're framing conversations. It is brilliant to see. As you know, we've chatted about this just before we signed on. I love this idea around acceptance without understanding. It's something I've said, a long time when trying to educate people around trans and non-binary identities in particular, whether that's pronouns or whatever rhetoric comes in, is that you don't have to understand something to show acceptance and kindness. You absolutely don't. What do you think? What have you experienced as some of the biggest barriers when it comes to breaking down that in itself?
Well, as I talk about in the philosophy of acceptance, because it really is, I think, a philosophy overall, is not everyone is ready for acceptance, right? There are people that are still struggling to understand. And you know what? It makes sense. If your listeners think about it, if you think about as when we're young, right? We kind of go like, why is the sky blue? Why this? Why? You look at a 2-year-old and the parents will tell you about the why phase, right? I mean, I've got two children. They're adults now, 31 and 27. So at the end of the day, there's this whole conversation about why. But then we get into school and we're supposed to learn. And to learn, we need to ask questions, right? So why is a question we ask to gain understanding? So really, by the time we're kind of finished the school system into corporate, and I mean, and I came from a technology background. That was my corporate role when I was a C-suite executive. We use things like the 5 why technique, which is to get to root cause analysis for problem solving. So as a society, we need to understand in order to accept. And what I'm asking is people to invert that because when it comes to human beings, you need to accept without understanding in order to grow to acceptance with understanding. In other words, creating the safe space allows you to have the dialogue that allows you to grow with the understanding you want to start with. So when we talk about in leadership spaces, people talk about curiosity, and curiosity is a great thing to talk about inclusion with leaders and the whole bit. But acceptance actually comes first because acceptance is the secret to creating safe spaces that allows curiosity to not feel like an attack, but to actually feel like engaging in an authentic dialogue.
We talk about we have an agreement at the start of our We Create Space sessions that we've put into place around. It talks around as long as your curiosity is centered in kindness. And actually that really ties into the fact of if you've got acceptance first, it's naturally going to be.
Yes. Yeah, because acceptance at its core is suspending judgment. Not, I mean, we're human beings. We're all, I catch myself passing judgments like, wow, Cynthia, you were really judgy. And so it's like, no, you know what? We need to train ourselves out of it. And it has to be a conscious thing that we train ourselves out of.
Sure. I mean, everyone is on there. Well, hopefully everyone does get to be on a journey of unlearning and relearning.
Yeah.
Where does tolerance fit in all of this for you? I mean, personally, my take on tolerance is I will not be tolerated, and tolerance is something that we talked about probably in the 90s, noughties. There was lots of talks around tolerance, and actually
Hmm.
I don't think it's enough. But some people, well, particularly when it comes to other characteristics such as religion and faith, there's a lot of talk about tolerance. Where do you sit with it?
Acceptance does not mean agreement. We can accept each other and not have to agree, but we're
Okay.
doing it civilly. I also don't want to be tolerated because tolerated means to be put up with.
Yeah.
Like, who wants to be put up with in a space, right? That's not going to make me feel safe. That's not going to
No.
create psychological safety. I'm not going to feel that I can be my authentic self. I'm going to mask something in order to exist in that space. And I know about you, but I masked for 50 years. I'm tired of masking. I don't know if I have the energy to do it, so I will not be tolerated. I just simply ask for acceptance. And you know what? In acceptance, just I'm me. This is me. This is my identity. And if you don't agree with it, guess what? You actually have that right, but you can't use your understanding of your perception to tell me how to live my life. And tolerance says, well, I'll exist in your life and we'll kind of figure it out some way. And nobody's really hitting a place where it is. I would rather not be in a space than to be tolerated.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I absolutely hear that. Let's focus on a little bit of your work that's coming up, and one of those pivots that I've seen in kind of changing the conversation is the title of an upcoming workshop that you've
Yeah.
got coming up. One leader, two genders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a bit more.
Well, one leader, two genders is actually, when I talk about the almost 500 organizations in 30 countries I've worked with, many of those, not all of them, many of them, I've delivered that session. And it's always a little bit different for every customer. So if you go on LinkedIn and you look at the reviews, they're all talking about the work I've done in that space. And I really work hard to create safe spaces for people to ask those questions. I always go, you know what? One of the superpowers I think I have in running that session is when there's questions related to a trans plus identity, it's like I'm the girl you can ask. Don't bother everybody else because not everybody's ready to answer those questions. I'll answer any question you ask. You may not like the answer, but I'll ask it. But I ask that you allow me to educate you in the process of answering that question. And so the whole idea is I share the experience of the way that I put it, what I learned about myself on my journey as a business executive, as a feminist leader, and ultimately as an LGBTQ plus leader internationally that I bring into the conversation. And so I actually lead with that business lens first. So a lot of people go, wow, you're really good at talking with leaders and executives and boards. And yeah, I was part of it. That was my world. And so I understand those folks. I understand the language that they speak. And so what I'm doing with this session, because in the preamble you may have seen, I normally get hired by companies and I do this internal. And so it never goes public.
Mm.
This is one of the very rare times that I'm running it during Trans Awareness Month, really, through November, in order to create, opportunities for those organizations that might be struggling with budgets right now, that might be going through redundancies or other trouble, but still want to deliver great education to their staff. And so I'm providing a different way, a different format for how I've normally done that work so that many more people can participate this November and hopefully feel that they're walking away with some great insights that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
I love the creativity. I love the fresh approach that you bring to everything and the way you educate. It is, yeah, it's really powerful. You can see that C-suite kind of experience and leadership coming through. And I think there is often there's often this tendency when we think about queer leaders, we put identity first in
Hmm.
terms of what they do. And actually, I love the fact that you're flipping on its head and saying, no, actually, I'm in this room because I'm shit hot at what I do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I go, I want being trans being completely incidental to the work I do. Yes, I can do trans related work, but there's also a lot of other great people here in the city. Many have been your guests before who also can do that work. What I want people to see is that leadership experience, that view from the top, what it takes to make those decisions, to create intentional cultures, and actually bring organizations through a journey. I've been there. I've done it. I've initiated it. I've held people's hand. And that's what I want people to see. The fact that I'm trans is incidental. It gives me what I call my one leader with two genders worth of experience, hence the session name.
Amazing. I'd love to dive into those sessions a little bit. What are some of the biggest things that you've discovered during those sessions, either in kind of like people surprising you by some of the things they say or think, and perhaps some moments where you've been, actually, these people are further along than I realized.
Um, it's really intriguing. My favorite part of the whole session that I do is the Q&A with the audience. I mean, I have done 30-minute presentations that had 2 hours of Q&A. The organization didn't, control their people to go, oh, well, it's 1 hour. Thank you. Goodbye. They said, if your schedule allows and you want to stay, Cynthia will stick around as long as you want to ask questions. And so, yeah, we did a 2.5 hour session where I actually only was paid to speak for 30 minutes, but I answered everyone's questions. I really believe in not being afraid to answer even the really hard questions that are asked these days. So, I mean, I've had all the typical questions. One that surprised me, but is actually very common now, is people ask me about my kids, my relationship with my children, um, which was, I mean, it was hard. It was so hard the first year. And it's weird. I think I am neurodiverse because I keep track of weird things. So I know that, in that first year, I saw my kids 5 times for a total of about 6 hours. And most of the time they were together. So I never had one-on-one time with each of them. And that was okay because they were building a bond as brother-sister to do it. But at the same time, they were also getting to know me again because it was the authentic me that they were getting to know. And so it wasn't the parent-child relationship we had. We're still parent and child. We don't use gendered titles, with me at least. And so as their parent, basically it was just a matter of, really looking at it and saying, okay, how do we do this? And so for me, it really lent into the fact that, I'm a certified mentor, and really because they're adults, it's more they will ask me when they want some mentor. Otherwise, I'm not their friend, I'm their parent. But the idea is we're creating a different kind of relationship. And that's really what we spent that first year doing. And that conversation began with me apologizing for the gendered way I had raised them without realizing, because I fell into that hetero usual way of raising kids. And I realized how much. So we have spent the last 9 years since I transitioned and coming out working on changing that narrative.
If you don't mind me asking, where are things now and are they in a good place?
Um, yeah, they're in a great place. It's funny because they're both in Canada in two different locations now. My son still lives with his mother, and my daughter is off on her own career journey, living with her partner in another province in Canada. Uh, we have a regularly scheduled 1 hour video meeting every week. Most of the weeks we hit it. Some weeks we don't. Life is busy. They're adults. They have busy lives. And when they make that time, we actually, in a year, spend more time talking now than when I lived in the same city as both of them. And so I feel it's a much better. And while I would love to be there to give my kids a hug, you know, that is the downside. So I try and send them as much virtual love, and telling them that I love them and the whole bit. And, that's part of, for me, a lot of people don't know that for the first 2 years when I came out, because of all the events that happened, and I know you ask questions and we get into the nitty gritty, um, for 2 years, I couldn't say I love you.
Mhm.
And through a lot of intense therapy, I got to the point, which is why for those that are close to me in my friend circle, kind of friends and, really close friends, I always say, I'm sending you love and hugs. And I mean that completely, that I send my friends genuine love because it's taken me so much effort to get back to actually knowing what love is and being able to share it.
Do you allow yourself to feel it?
Oh, that's $1 million question. I'm working on it, Neil. I'm working on it. Am I there? No, I'm
Yeah.
not there. For those closest to me that know all the life mess and craziness and everything going on, they're teaching me how to love myself. Because they love me so unconditionally, they're actually helping me learn to love myself unconditionally. So I'm way better than I was even a year ago. I know I am, but I'm not there. Um, I got work to do still.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
But I am so excited to dive into your origin story, and I'm sure we're going to unpick some of those things that we've just been talking about. For now, are you ready to pause and rewind?
Absolutely.
Here we go. Take me back. Tell me all about little Cynthia.
My first memory, and people might find it hard to believe, but I've actually validated this with my mother before she passed. My first memory is from when I'm 1 years old, when growing up in Belfast, Northern Ireland. In fact, it's the only way you know that I'm Irish when I tell you that I'm from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and I can
Ah, come through.
I can't, you honestly will not hear it in anything else I say. And no matter how much I try and put on my Irish, I can't. So, anyways, 1 years old, I'm in my nappy, standing in front of the telly, dancing to some music program that's on. And, it's funny that that is one of my first memories, dancing. Dancing has literally been a part of my life. And, as you know me as well from the House of Happiness, it literally is such a magical space to just be myself. And as you know, I've showed up at times and it's just like, life was full on. And I just go and I just forget the world and I just have the absolute most amazing time. And that is harking back to that 1 year old little Cynthia.
That's a gorgeous memory. But
Yeah,
has music always been important to you?
not consciously.
Okay.
Um, but as I've looked back through my life, music has defined the stages of my life. And through my transition, every major part of my transition, there's music that associates. So if I go back historically, I think 3, 4 years ago, I did a series of the top 10 songs that define my life. Now, don't ask me which ones they were. I've got certainly some music to answer later questions that to me is impactful for a number of ways. But the reality is that music very much speaks to that. And so, uh, yeah, so I look at it. So if I want to go back to those, early quote trans joy moments that I had through the beginning of my journey in that, I just go back and listen to the music and it instantly takes me right back. It's such a powerful tool.
Yeah, I love it when we develop our own soundtracks for different eras. Absolutely. What are the perhaps the favorite anecdotes that you've heard about little Cynthia?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think one of the fun things was that while ended up being estranged, disowned by my birth family, um, some of the conversations we did have, as example, my middle name is Allison with one L. When I had a conversation with my mother, and this actually happened literally before she went into a coma before she passed, and that was about 2 years into my transition. And she said, when she was pregnant with me, she thought I was going to be born a girl. I went, well, she was right. 50 years later, but she was right. But she had actually picked out the name Allison with one L as so that is why my middle name is Allison, because it literally is the name my mother gave me.
That's gorgeous. What I'd love to know, where
Yeah.
did Cynthia come from?
Oh my gosh. So Cynthia, originally, when it happened, what a lot of people, certainly in the UK, don't know was that I was actually a closeted crossdresser for 42 years. I didn't know that I was trans. I didn't know the language. I actually thought it was a sexual thing.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until I really started to come to terms with, where I was at, which is at about 48 years old. And I was actually on a business trip when I used to travel. I used to travel with his and her suitcases. Um, so here's this executive checking in, and I've got two suitcases, his and hers. Didn't pack it all in one, had separate suitcases. And in doing that, it was, I ended up kind of having, it was always in private. I was never going out in public or anything. And this one time when I was dressed and I had my makeup done as crudely as I did it back then, and I looked in the mirror, and for the very first time, there was this question of who is she? I'd never, in 48 years, I'd never asked that question. It was always about the feeling and everything else. And so, that really got me thinking. And so I thought of the girls through school that I really related to, and they all had a similar look and feel, much what I try and embody today, blondish, um, and hopefully a fun gal, trying to look as pretty as I can, and those were the girls. Two of them were called Cynthia. Now, what is intriguing is that's what I would tell you was my origin story, but the fact is that without even consciously thinking about it, that name is exactly why my father disowned me, because that's his mother's name. And,
Okay.
and so he felt I was dishonoring her by using her name. And so the short answer I give people when you're kind of looking to do that very quick talk is it was my paternal grandmother's name, and so that's why I picked it. But the fact was that I was actually influenced through the girls that I met through school.
So no connection at all. It's interesting. We're hearing two simultaneous origin stories. When you look back at little Cynthia,
Yeah.
all just fall into place with who you are now when you think
Yeah.
about the stages of growing up, being surrounded
Mm.
by those girls that perhaps had influenced you?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I answer your question, I do want to put a content warning talking about suicide. Um, the first time I attempted suicide, which is why for those the I have a tattoo, a semicolon, which in Canada I put it on here because first of all, I was actually told when I got it done, well, executives don't have tattoos. I was very totally frowned upon. But the way I did it is I wanted the youth that I was interacting and working with to be able to see it and know that I've gone through a journey like them. And so for me, uh, I can look back with a more positive, reflective light. And one of these Cynthias, she wasn't actually called Cynthia, but one of these girls, I realized that in my journey, the reason that I felt suicidal at that point was because she was the kind of girl I wanted to be. It was when we broke up, it was a whole whirlwind romance. She dated the quarterback. They had broken up. She rebounded to me. I was not exactly an alpha in the pack, but we dated for a whole 7 to 10 days. And then she went back to him. Obviously, it was a revenge thing. But at the end of the day, it was like I was with the girl I wanted to be.
Mm,
And so when that happened, I thought it was, kind of my first real, heartbreak. It was actually much more than that.
yeah.
Uh, and to deal with it, yeah, yet, you know, when we talk about, the whole mental health, the school psychologist or that was involved, because I did end up getting help, was she said, oh, well, he at the time was just seeking attention.
Okay. How old were you around that time?
That time would have been high school. So 16, 15, 16. Yeah.
what did help look like at that time? And was it a recurring, if you don't mind me
Yeah.
asking, was it something that was a recurring feeling?
Um, no, it didn't reoccur. It actually didn't reoccur until I was actually transitioning. That was the second time that it came into my life. Um, what did it look like? I was in a pretty dark place at that moment, and I forget what happened. I ended up having to come out to my parents. So it was actually friends of mine at the time that intervened in the moment and stopped me from doing anything fatal. Uh, and they were the ones that helped me report it to the school counseling staff to get help. And at that point, the staff had to inform my parents. And they gave me a chance to tell my parents before the call came in. And at that point, they had already had arranged within the school division um, in Canada that they had already set up the meeting with the psychologist. And so when we went to their offices, my mother brought me and we kind of went through the journey. And I just took it for what it was, a moment in time. But it definitely set something in motion. And when I first thought I've got this nailed, I've figured this out, I was so wrong. I was so wrong. And I think the most powerful thing is that I've realized there's always an aspect that's there, but my therapist had given me a beautiful analogy, and that was it's okay to go into the dark space, but carry your flashlight so that I can carry my virtual flashlight and look in all of those dark corners that might be scaring me or causing the anxiety, and just to see there's nothing there that I really need to be afraid of. And so in those moments, I go to that analogy and I do actively explore my darkness often, but I do it with my flashlight because that's my tool to always ensure that I'm safe.
That is a fantastic analogy, and I can really hear that it's still something that serves you now.
Completely. Yeah, it was a game changer.
Is it something that you've been able to tap into in the current landscape for the LGBTQ plus and specifically the trans community?
Well, I certainly tap into it for myself of how I get through all of the rhetoric and chatter that goes on these
Mm.
days. And people that want to or slip into because they're in the middle of their dark place. I always share that as a piece of advice in hopes that it helps them to guide through because it was simply more than a conversation like what I just shared with you that was shared. And for me, it was an aha moment. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how we do that. So, yeah, I openly shared it. It's not something I've integrated into any programming because it's not something you normally deal with, but it's also not a topic that I'm afraid to deal with.
Yeah. I mean that's I don't think there's many topics that you're afraid to deal with, and that shines through in your work and
Yeah.
who you are, and just the raw conversations that we've had about things, and it's important. It's important
Hmm.
to be comfortable with, to get comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes.
Yes.
I just want to rewind a little bit, if that's
Yeah.
okay. So
Yep.
taking it back to, perhaps slightly earlier school, what were you like at school, and what was the vision? I mean, you've got a
Yeah.
30 odd year career in technology, but what was the original goal?
Oh, I'm not sure what the original goal was. Partly because it wasn't my authentic goal. It's what
Yeah.
was put upon me. Um, I would today describe the person I was as, uh, beta versus alpha. Um, I was, you know, low or second lowest on the school social totem pole. I mean, I remember at one point that goaded into a fight with, quote, the lowest. So you kind of have the two lowest people entertaining everybody with a fist fight to deal with it. I just so happened I ended up actually getting a severe flu, and so I wasn't in school for 3 days. So that really looked good in the other person's account, and so for that I saw that I think it can best be said. when you talk to people and they go, "Oh, I'd love to go back to those high school days. Those were some of the best." Not, I never want to go back to that part of my life. That is a part of my life I want nothing to do with. They were not the best years. They were, in fact, the worst part of my life. Um, so coming out of it, I did whatever people they went, "Oh, well, you're good at that. You should do this." And so I was like, "Sure, I'll just go there," because I had no sense of what it was. Um, and I did it, and it just happened to be in tech. And it just literally evolved. Um, and I got good at it. And I went and I took additional schooling. I mean, all my post-secondary education was done while as a working business person. I went back to night school and everything else. I ended up getting all of my post-secondary education. And that really propelled me because I was able to connect it with the work I was doing. So the lessons really became active the moment I learned them. I was able to put them into action. And that really defined that career up until the point that C-suite. And, what a lot of people don't know about me that I've mentioned a few times, especially in some of those private corporate, events. I had no idea how to be a man. I had zero sense. So what I learned to do was to see how other boys, men were socially successful, and I literally copied what they were doing. That actually led me to be a C-suite executive. I had no idea. None. I got really good at copying.
Is partly that why high school and those years were so difficult and then moving through?
Well, I think so, but it was also the bullying, you
Mm,
know. If everybody wanted to rough somebody up or to, embarrass somebody, whatever, I was always the butt of their joke.
yeah.
And so, I mean, I was not gay. I certainly didn't know who I was. I was pretending to be somebody because that's what I was told I was supposed to be. And I guess you could say I was lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess and that mimicking is a form of the mimicking and as we were talking about earlier, masking.
Yeah.
It's self-preservation, right?
Hmm. Oh, completely, completely. Because otherwise, I had no idea how to survive.
Was there a moment that you recall where things started to maybe get a bit easier, or you found a little bit of belonging and a community? It sounds like you had some great friends during high school that advocated for you and supported you. But was there a bit of a shift where you perhaps found a bit of happiness and belonging?
Yeah, I mean, like when I graduated high school in 86, not no, 83, sorry. In 86, I was married.
Okay.
Um, I was 20 years old. Yeah, 20 years old. Got married, was married for 32 years. 28 of those years were magical.
Okay.
They were amazing. And it's only as I couldn't be that person that my parents wanted, that my spouse wanted, that my job that I couldn't be that person. And I started to figure out who I was for me. That's when everything started to fall apart because I wasn't who they wanted me to be because I was starting to become who I am.
Yeah.
And, so there was, like I said, during that period, there was 28 years of, I mean, work was stressful. It was a high stress job. It was not a 9 to 5 job. And the further up the hierarchy in the corporate world that I got, the more my entire life was the job. Like if I went socializing, I was socializing as the C-suite executive in that space. So the social calendar, the work calendar, the travel calendar was all centered around work. Um, and so ultimately, as I found myself and as I started to leave all those pieces behind, as they fell away, that also meant that whole part of who I was disappeared. And I had to figure out all of that. from scratch. And I'd say I'm still working at it today. I'm still figuring it out. I mean, it was just under. I mean, end of December will be 2 years I've been sober. Um, that was not a journey I was expecting. I was enjoying my G&Ts and everything else, but everything was based around that. And realizing as I look back, even my initial social circles in London were all centered on drinking.
Yeah.
And now that I've done that, as I know I've had to create a whole new social set of circles, which is really just coming into its own now. And so I'm starting to feel like I've really connected with others who share much more real values that I have.
Yeah, it is it's all a journey. You think you're on one journey and then all of a sudden something else comes and you're like, oh, okay, I thought I had this figured.
Yeah.
I thought I was all right. With that busy,
Yeah.
crazy lifestyle, when things started to
Hmm.
fall away, when what was the moment that things became went from being kind of like secret with the kind of like dressing in women's
Hmm.
clothes, yeah, in secret and that side of exploration. What was the moment that started to become more open and more of an intentional
Yeah.
movement?
Within the family, September 2015, that's when I came out to my spouse. And as I write about in my debut book, not yet published, still looking for a publisher if any are listening.
Hint, hint.
Yeah. Um, I talk about it as an atom bomb being dropped on the relationship, one
Okay.
that we clearly didn't recover from. I came out publicly in 2016, and to give you an idea where I was at mentally was there was a obviously a horrible coming out story that happened in that moment in 2015. I was told that I was sick, that I needed to see somebody, yada yada yada. I spent that time finding somebody to speak to. I saw that person January 3rd or 4th in 2016. And by February 12th of 2016, 6 weeks later, I moved out of the marital home of 29 years, 30. And I moved into my own flat. And for the very first time in my life 50, at 50, I lived on my own for my very first time.
How did that feel?
There was
Hmm.
a lot of crying. Um, Crying of the person that I hadn't been, that I could have been, crying for the people I left behind, um, who made it clear where they stood in or not in my life, and crying for the unbelievable amount of queer joy that came into my life that literally was so joyful it made me cry. Yeah.
It was a sense of, I guess, in amongst the sadness and the grieving for natural loss that also
Yeah.
came relief, freedom too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, part of that was the journey. I'd say when I talk about journeys, the simplest journey I've been on has been my gender because I just quote flip my binary. Um, my sexuality journey has been squiggly at best. Where I live from growing up in Ireland and facing as a child of 6 years old, um, experiencing in Northern Ireland, all of the troubles that are there to the point where, men in black masks actually knocked on my parents' door and threatened them. That 30 days later, we were living in Canada to before I came to the UK, living in South America, during COVID lockdown. It's many of my journeys have been squiggly. My gender is the only journey that's literally been straightforward. But even then, I still had to navigate, was I a cross-dresser coming out or was I actually trans? And the realization that when I was with the cross-dressing community was these are not my people. I
Mm.
I don't relate to their stories. I don't relate to their experience. They're completely valid. That's their experiences, but they're not my experiences. And when I spoke with the trans community, and I was involved in a few support meetings, and it was like, these are my people. They're saying the words that I'm thinking. And so, yeah, this is absolutely it. And there was no turning back. At that point, I knew who I was. I just needed to become me and to travel the journey to find me because I couldn't assume everything he, the male part of me, had learned. Those were unauthentic in many ways. I wanted to be completely authentic, so I didn't just simply carry on with the same behavior. I took them, I broke them down, I analyzed them, I made them authentically me, and then I brought them back in. And I call it the deep work. I did the deep work and I still do the deep work today when I think I'm not being authentic or I'm trying to learn more about myself. I do the deep work and it's hard and it's emotional, it's spiritual. Um, but oh my gosh, it's so authentic when I get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you ooze authenticity, like you do just in this
Thanks.
conversation alone, but just knowing you, I'd love to
Mm,
just dive into the moment that you found your voice and destination in
yeah.
inclusion, because from a 30 odd year career in tech to doing
Yeah.
what you're doing now is a
Yeah.
massive life pivot shift.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, it is and it isn't. Let me try and be succinct in connecting the dots. So in that role as an executive, I realized, I mean, I had a daughter and I realized that, the world wasn't fair. But a male perception of what is fair in a female world, trust me, is night and day. I.e., if you'd asked me at that point as my male self, did I think I was being a great ally for women? I'd say sure. When I look back today and reflect on was that part of me at the time actually being a good ally? Not even getting close. Not even. Because one of the things I wasn't doing was asking the questions and listening to what was needed. And so I was involved in many initiatives. And in fact, it ended up being that a lot of the corporate initiatives that I ran were to bring young women in work experience and co-op program in order to give them some real credibility to actually put on their CV when they went out to market. And then I also used my professional network that I had spent a lifetime curating in order to help them actually connect with the unpublished job market out there. And, that's what I was doing to ensure that there was more women and girls in the STEM industry space to deal with it. When I pivoted away from that technology work, I realized that I never really was interested in technology. And I should have realized that because my saying was that, all my competitors could go buy the same hardware and software that I'm using. It's the people and processes that make what we do with it different. And guess what? It's the people and processes that interest me. And that's what I focus on today. And it was to do this. And I forget one of my procedures that I was recovering from during transition. I had this epiphany thinking about it and was like, hang on, that technology job, that's what everybody else thought I should do. Because it was a hobby that became a career.
Mm.
And so it's like, what do I do authentically? So I started, I mean, day one, when I started doing work, um, I didn't know what work I would be doing. So that's why I created the business name CAF Service, my initials, Cynthia Allison Fortlage Services. I don't know what services. And that's why in 2025, with a date yet to be determined, um, there will be a fundamental change in the business that you're starting to see now. I'm bringing in elements to show this shift. And CIF services will go away. Because when I started, I was coaching women in order to help improve it. And that really manifested in one of my very first workshops called 50 Years of Male Thinking for Women in 1 hour, because that's all they need. I know it's a tongue
I
in
love the
cheek.
fact you're not afraid to be tongue in cheek.
No. And the reality is that is the fourth book that I'm writing right now. I've got two written, not published. Hint, hint. Um, but I'm writing two concurrently. My first fiction work, which is the advice my mother gave me, and then I also decided to take this work. And you may have seen on LinkedIn and that I've put out posts asking women if they would share their stories with me. I will share the advice that I would give during that workshop privately with them. But the exchange is I will take the story and write about not their story, but the experience, and then kind of talk about the elements. And then what I do is then I consult some, um, you know, um, of the, oh, what do they call them? The deep research papers and that, looking for correlating research that validates the advice that I've given. So I kind of have the advice piece, and then there's the supporting research that validates it. So depending whether people kind of how deep they need to go. So that's what the book is about. And it's written for primarily a female audience because I want them to know how men are socialized, the unwritten book of male socialization, to use that to empower their life and their career.
Wow, that's huge. Where do you
Oh,
find the time to do it all?
I live, sleep, breathe, like that is my purpose. My purpose is acceptance without understanding. I talk to spirit. I'm not religious anymore. That's a whole other story. Irish Protestant becomes a Roman Catholic in Canada, and now I'm spiritual. I don't believe in any particular structure. And so I speak to spirit, and spirit is the one that gave me acceptance without understanding as a way to figure out what to deal with, which was when my marriage was breaking down. There was love, but there wasn't acceptance.
Mm.
And so true love is acceptance. So love and acceptance. That's what
Yeah,
true love is. So short version, otherwise you just get me going. So the whole idea is when I see this, it's how to deal with it. So, I have helped through that coach. I was never a certified coach, but I'm now a certified mentor. So I work typically with queer people and a lot of queer women and a lot of folks that are in the STEM industries of how to kind of do the career planning, career progression. And literally everyone I've worked with has achieved either a new role, an increase in pay in their current role. They have moved into a new job in line with an industry that they actually want to be in, or I have one gal who's now a very dear friend, and she wanted to move into the C-suite, get her first C-suite role, and she was successful after we had spent time and worked together. And I did not get these people these things. I just simply mentored them and gave them the confidence to believe in themselves as much as I believe in them in order to achieve their desired outcome. And um, I love doing it. In fact, for which is why I partner with so many groups where I literally give away the mentoring as a way to give back for everything that I've been given. And um, yeah,
yeah. Your allyship, your allyship, your commitment, your generosity, it's just all coming through in the way you work with people. And I know how passionate you are, having been part of the, UN Women UK's group and your goals as well. I love this goal
yeah,
that you shared with uh
yeah.
underscore said dedication to educating and inspiring a broader audience with the audacious goal of teaching 1 billion people about acceptance by the year 2025.
Yeah, you know what? That you blame Spirit for that one. Earlier this year, Spirit and I were kind of in a moment, and Spirit said, "You're not doing enough to bring acceptance without understanding to the world." I have given you this responsibility, and I take responsibility very seriously, and it's like, okay. And so we kind of thought on it, and it was like, oh, well, I'll do 1 million people until I
Yeah.
realized I've probably taught a couple of 100,000 over the last 9 years, you know? And then it was like, okay, so that's not big enough. And so it just hit me. It's like, I want from my corporate days, we want a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. A goal so big, you would go, there's no way. I just call it an audacious goal because to write it all out, I think it loses something. So the audacious goal is to not reach, but teach 1 billion people about acceptance without understanding by the year 2050.
Amazing. Stay tuned, everyone.
I part of the launch is I figured out and the restructure without giving in is I need to create a foundation to make this happen globally.
Okay.
And that's part of the rebrand.
I'm so excited to see all of this unfold.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask you, what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way?
Number one is your story has value. We need to listen to learn. You need to give back, not necessarily money. Look, I mean, money's really important. But if you can't give back money, giving back in other ways is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Um, and research, which kind of goes with the learning. Like you need to just continuously keep learning. You can never know enough. I always love that, people talk, oh, well, I'm an expert in this. And I think I use that title, when I talk about the work. I don't know everything there is to know. I know to go find information and I can make sense of it very quickly because I've dealt with it for so much. But, even in the world of tech, you know, people saw me as some sort of oracle to go ask questions. I was never an expert. I just knew how to get answers and be able to, accomplish things very quickly. And I've now brought that into this space in developing that insight. And yeah, I may know something that others don't, but at the end of the day, I'm also a rapid learner, which allows me to bring that in and add depth and context because of all the experiences I've had through this squiggly life journey that I've been on, that allows me to add value when I share it.
Who has shaped you the most along the way?
You know what? The first answer I normally give for this is, my father. But my father really shaped the early me to a large way. But the more that I unpack the stuff I need to unpack and become authentic, is a lot of the stuff that he brought to me, right? Because I was doing it what he said his way because it worked. Um, and so I'm unpacking a lot of his stuff. My heroes today are the youth. I look to the youth. They are leaders today, not leaders of tomorrow. They're leaders today. They're leaders in climate justice, social justice, gender justice, you name it. And I'm starting to learn on that journey to look to myself and to trust myself in a way I've never done before. Because I know stuff. As my friend says, I know a few things about a few things.
I love that expression.
Yeah.
You certainly do. Does happiness and success look and feel how you thought it would?
No, not even close. I was just actually working on a piece because I think it's an aspect of leadership that gets ignored. You know, leadership in my early days was you got money, you were recognized formally as a leader, and you had, quote, power in that perception. And that creates this heterousual, I don't like using the word normal or a variation, the heterousual way of life that a lot of people perceive. And what I realized that today, my measure of success is my heart and soul filled with the work I do? Money's great. You need money for a lot of things. Can always use more to have the basics because I would love to move out of what I consider a survival mode. I would love to move into just existing and taking a rest for a moment. But gosh, I would love to get back to thriving because if you think I give back or contribute now, just wait till I get to thriving. I mean, I, I'm not even in overdrive yet because I'm struggling in survival mode.
Mm.
So today I am heart and soul centered as to my definition of feeling successful.
That is such a beautiful place to get to. How would you advise others to get there?
It's a lot of work, and you don't need to change your gender to do it. Um, the idea of acceptance without understanding, it's a model, it's what my debut book is about to teach people the journey I went through, how I do deep work, what tools I use. That's what you need to do. You need to start A, prepare for acceptance, B, do the work to accept yourself. And I'm still on that journey. When I get to the point where I'm accepting myself enough, then I can ask for those in what I call my immediate circle, my close circle, to accept me. That gives me support. And when I have the support, then I can ask the world to accept me. And when you ask the world to accept you, then you can pursue your true dreams and fulfillment of what your purpose is on this planet.
Amazing. So I want to dive into so much more of this, but my final question
Yeah.
for this segment is looking back so far, what
Mhm.
are you most proud of to date?
The easy answer would be my kids. But I think that, when I really look at, what's out there, I think the journey itself has been probably probably well, it's certainly not something I expected. Um, but it's really been the thing that's actually given me the greatest joy in myself. And it's not been an easy journey, I, but it's a journey I would do in a heartbeat again because it's been so transformation, not only physically, but spiritually, mentally. Um, yeah, like I know why I'm here, and I don't think there's a lot of people can say they know why they're on this planet right now. I do. I feel wholly convinced. I know why I'm here. And that's what a blessing. What a blessing to know that.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quickfire questions?
Absolutely. Got my list.
What album, book, or movie, or all three, have
Yeah.
had a lasting impact on you?
Okay. Album, Pink Floyd The Wall. Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, here's one not many people know. XTC, the song Making Plans for Nigel, because that was my birth name.
Okay.
Um, and the album by Krista Berg, Spanish Train, it was the first time I'd really listened deeply to a storytelling singer. And in fact, Krista Berg was my very first concert. So album-wise, that's where I'm at. Book-wise, if you had asked me pre-transition, the book is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I already explained to you my high school life. And so that was a fundamental book that I felt gave me skills to be able to make friends and gain influence in the business world. Today, and I just posted about it before we went live, so you wouldn't have seen it. But listening to previous podcast interviews you've done, I really thought deeply about this and the book Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I read that book 35, 40 years ago, and it still sticks in my brain. And I just realized why. Because of the story of the character Charlie and the growth that Charlie goes through in figuring it out. But Charlie was always driven by external validation, the old me. And I have learned to do it. The book ended, and Charlie never learned to look at internal validation. And I've moved to a journey of internal validation, but my journey very much is reflected in that story by Daniel Keyes. Now, movie wise, I'm going to floor you with this one a bit. The 1970 version of Scrooge the musical. Now, Scrooge the musical, if that doesn't twig it, that's the 1843 story written by Dickens of The Christmas Carol. And this is a musical version. And the very last song in the musical is Thank You Very Much. Um, and it really but to me, the message that the ghost of the third ghost of Christmas Future talks about is that, and I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, because to me it defines the whole movie, but it's what I always looked at, and that was there is never enough time to do or say all the things that you would wish. The thing is to try and do as much as you can in the time that you have. And that is what I live by, because every year as an executive, I would watch that movie to remind me of my humanity that I lost during the year of being a good corporate executive.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think Scrooge is often uh underrated and maybe kind of like, downplayed in terms of the story and the meaning behind it, but that really sums it up beautifully.
Yeah,
Yeah. I've not seen that. Thank you for sharing those and
you're welcome.
for prepping them. I need to check out that book. It sounds great. What's a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
Okay, so live by acceptance without understanding. Um, it's my calling. One I want to put in the bin, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What a way to create a toxic mindset of independence where you don't need anybody, that you figure you can do this life journey all on your own, and you've got to fight and struggle where, look, it's not easy, but if you can do it with others and we can uplift and help each other, like, why would we not do that? So this idea of, kind of do it on your own, pull up your boot. Now, put it in the bin.
Straight in the bin, straight in the bin. And that speaks so much to your spirit of collaboration and community, right?
Yeah, completely. It's um once I learned collaboration as a leader, I literally became a collaborative leader because others felt a part of the decision making and day-to-day process. And I wasn't deferring my decision making authority to them. I literally wanted their voice in, because at the end of the day, if you're a leader, somebody's doing the work that you commit to. And it's kind of nice to have them actually a part of the commitment. And so I always referred to myself at the end of my career as an executive. I'm the mouthpiece and paper pusher of my group. I don't do the real work. My team does the real work. They're the technical geniuses. I'm just really good at talking about it and writing about it. As an executive, you do a lot of that.
Yeah. I love the way you cut through the bullshit when you're championing other people.
Completely.
What's been the best adventure of your life so far?
Oh, I love some of your guests. I mean, Eva, I think I said, this journey that I'm on, my life journey. Absolutely. I mean, I think in a traditional sense of journey, traveling the world. I mean, I've been to 56 countries and counting. I'm behind, but I've been able to work with companies in 30 different countries. I've lived in six of them. I've lived in, Ireland, Canada, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and now I'm here in England, in the UK, living in London. Um, that's a heck of an adventure. And I've done it through the squiggly life career through all of that. And you know what? Seeing and being in those places, not as a holidayer, but actually living like for a month
Mm.
at a time. it has fundamentally changed my understanding. And and I won't go into the detail for sake of time. My biggest spiritual aha moment was when I lived in Colombia, um, in Medellin, Colombia, or Medellin, depending how you pronounce your double L's, for 6 months during the first lockdown of COVID-19. I was stuck there, um, partly by choice. But at the end of the day, those folks who are 99.6% Catholic, we came to an understanding between their broken English and my broken Spanish that you be you, and I'll be me, and we can live together. And there was no issue. It may have been affected the fact that I clearly was a tourista in that space, but I was there for 6 months, and my neighbors in the flat that I was not once had a problem. We never once had an issue with each other, and it just proved to me that if we're really committed to doing life together, coexisting, it's quite possible, regardless what our values and beliefs are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
Purposeful,
Okay.
spiritual, and aspirational. I am doing everything with a purposeful intent. I am driven by spirit, and I hope that I aspire others or inspire, but I am aspiring to be somebody that I'm still not yet. And that's the journey called life.
Boom. Let's fast forward a little bit, not too
Yes.
far. What exciting things do you have coming up?
Well, I've talked about the new business structure that
Mhm.
will launch at some point through 2025. It's already starting to show itself on socials and that, but they're not overly active and they won't be until I get all the structural business stuff in place in 2025. Um, right now, my writing has taken over um, a lot of what I do. I mean, I've written 11 and a half million words on gender diversity.
Wow.
I have taught my own AI engine about gender diversity. It's my assistant. And so everything I do, I'm like constantly filtering and training and growing and learning. So, I mean, I've written two manuscripts as yet unpublished. My first book, Acceptance Without Understanding, about the whole process. My second book, The Things I Wish Mothers Would Teach Their Sons About Women, which comes from my experiences both being a married man, my own gender transition, and also as a national leader for the women's movement. Um, all of those things that I wish little boys would be taught in order to see women more wholly.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's what that. And now my two books, as I've talked about, the advice my mother gave me because I didn't grow up as her little girl. Other women are giving me their piece of advice that I'm turning into a fiction-based story. And the other one of the 50 years of male thinking in 1 hour for women, because that's all they need, which is taking the advice and stories from issues women are experiencing that are impacted by the men in their life and what advice comes to the table to help them navigate through that.
It's just all so exciting. I can't wait to see those things. And again,
Yeah.
hint, publishers out there, get in touch.
Yes.
What brings you joy?
Oh my gosh. Being with my friends, both old and new, dancing, um, teaching acceptance. Honestly, I it just fills my heart and soul. And the time that I get to spend with my kids, albeit virtual, it literally is the best part of my week.
What takeaways do you have for anyone wanting to either carve out a career in inclusion or create something inclusive?
Well, I think it goes back to, some of the points I shared a little earlier, right? Is realize that your story has value. Um, that's where I started, as I had, quote, my story, and I started talking about it off the side of my corporate job, which was great because I could do it for little to no charge because I still had a corporate income. Now when I get into a place where I'm at, I know my story has value. I have attributed a value to it that not everybody agrees. Um, so, the idea is realize it has value. And I love, because one of the things in the diversity space that always challenging, well, if you have a corporate job and so, but you enjoy doing, speaking gigs the whole bit, always ask for some sort of value financially. Why? Okay, even if you don't need it because your corporate job, donate that money. We have so many organizations in need. Donate that money to them. In other words, do your speaking on behalf of and send your donation to them. Then you're giving back. And now you've done two things that you've realized your story has value and you're giving back in real tangible ways.
Yeah. Yeah, the power of storytelling. It comes up so
Yep.
much on here, and it really is. My final question for you, I could have easily chatted so much about so much of this
Yep.
stuff that I'm going to pick your brain at another time. But my final question for you is this: do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
I think for me, the importance of realizing the the critical aspect of intersectionality as human beings. There's many things we do in life, in corporate and other aspects, where we look at a part of our identity. Maybe it might be, that historically I was baptized into the Catholic. So do I say that I'm a Catholic? And well, yeah, I mean, technically that was the last organized religion, but I'm also white, which in indigenous nations where there's an indigenous culture coming from Canada, in indigeneity is a huge aspect that you have to factor into the thinking. So to say that I'm a white lesbian woman, but I have a trans history, which is just the way I like to refer to it, because I feel it's in my past. I'm not living in my past. I'm living in my present, and my present is I'm a woman. That's the way society treats me. Um, and when we look at all the aspects of our identity, don't let any single one define who we are. Um, what we need to look at, much as I tell corporate clients, so here's a free piece of advice, is it's great to have ERGs and policies that deal with a particular aspect of someone's identity. But when you are dealing with the person, the human being, you need to be intersectional and deal with the whole person. And we don't. We don't. It's one of the missing pieces. We don't deal with the whole people. We go, oh, well, yeah, if you're trans, well, yeah, we got a transition policy. And it's like, but I'm a whole person. So, so I always talk about looking at the life cycle of a human being as it relates to corporate policies. And so don't be defined by one aspect of your identity, be intersectional, um, be proud, because all of us are amazing. Just being a human being is pretty amazing. Um, and focus on what we have in common, not what we have different.
Thank you so much. I just want to echo, I think you are amazing, and I am so grateful to have spent this time with you. I can't wait to see you soon. Thank you so much,
See you
Cynthia.
soon. You're welcome. Thanks, love.
I don't know about you, but I am feeling all of the feels following that conversation with Cynthia. There is so much to take away from it. Firstly, let's focus on that audacious goal that Cynthia describes as audacious to teach 1 billion people around acceptance without understanding. Acceptance without understanding is something that I've often spoke about, as I mentioned during the episode, and it's so important during today that we really kind of put that into practice. You do not have to understand something to show acceptance, kindness, and we are gone beyond tolerance. So I just love what Cynthia is doing around that. There were so many mic drop moments and statements that really stood out for me. Um, particularly around Cynthia as being aspiring to be someone that I'm still not yet, and that's the journey called life. And you can see how she is striving towards that person. And at the moment it's a real struggle. And she talks about, if we think she's having the impact now, what will happen when she's in thrive mode versus survive mode? I really loved her sharing her, her stories of living in different countries, from growing up in Belfast through to moving to Canada, and then some of the other moments as well. There's the great line that she shared around kind of, she knows what she's here for. And there's not many people on the planet that can say that, and she considers that a real blessing. Hearing her talk about, how she's guided by spirituality was absolutely fascinating to listen to. How she takes her cue, and that spirituality kind of galvanizes her and guides her to what she's doing. Um, and just, hearing her talk about her relationship with her children, her marriage, and all of the different things that have brought us to the Cynthia that we know now, and for many of us out there, the Cynthia that we know and love now. And the words that she uses to describe her origin story: purposeful, spiritual, and aspirational. There was just so many moments in there to take stuff away from. Yeah, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I hope that you are too. Cynthia is absolutely smashing it with writing books. And again, I'm going to put it out there. If you are a publisher, please do get in touch with Cynthia and have a chat with her. That would be incredible. Thank you so much for listening, Cynthia. I can't wait to see you in person at an event or on a dance floor soon. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please do like, subscribe, share with anyone that you think might benefit from listening. Help bring these conversations to the audience. They deserve to be heard. So that's all from me. Thanks so much and see you soon. Cheers.